现在订阅同盟会英语，不论找工作、升学或英检，表现更棒。快上
StudioClassroom.com。
现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Join us today as we talk about the importance of reading every day. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another Advanced Studio Classroom. My name is Simon, and you're joining me in the studio today for the second part of our April education article. The article is called The Benefits of Reading, and yesterday we looked at tips on how to improve your child's reading ability, but today we're going to look at the ways reading can help boost brain power. Joining me in the studio for today's program, we have Zach. Welcome back, Zach.
Good to be back.
Zach, you told us yesterday that you really like reading. What kinds of books do you spend most of your time reading?
Most of the time I am reading nonfiction, so more informative books.
Okay.
Most of the time.
Trying to learn? Expand your world?
Trying to, yeah.
Fantastic. Good stuff. Do you feel it has boosted your brain power?
Yeah, I would say certainly. I think it definitely opens up new ideas, and what's really helped is to be able to kind of pair reading information books with a reading group. I know that didn't come up yesterday. We talked about more like reading with a parent, but even reading with a group of friends and then being able to discuss new ideas and or going deeper with old ones, I think has been a real benefit in my earlier years in young adult life.
Okay, one more quick question. I asked you there if you thought reading had boosted your brain power. What exactly does that mean, to boost your brain power?
Well, I imagine brain power, you mean kind of like your ability to process ideas and to maybe handle complexity and things like that.
Okay, and boost means?
To improve.
Yeah, or increase, right? So basically when we say boost brain power, what we mean is make you smarter.
Right.
Help you improve your thinking. Our second panelist today is Andrea. Welcome back, Andrea.
Well, thank you, Simon. Great to be here.
Now, Andrea, I had a question for you yesterday because yesterday you mentioned, you made reference to a very common problem that probably a lot of our listeners share. It was just that you would like to read more, but one of the challenges you face is finding time to read, right?
Yes.
So what I wanted to ask you was if you have found that you get sort of a similar benefit from using something like audiobooks or listening to podcasts, things like that. Do you do those things?
Actually, I do not.
You don't.
I know a lot of people do. I tried doing it for a bit when I was driving, but I also just enjoyed that time talking to my kids in the van. So it wasn't something I really enjoyed. I know a lot of people who commute to work, who are in a car a lot, really enjoy that type of listening, but it just hasn't been available.
I wondered
to me.
because those things have become very, very popular particularly in Western culture, less so here in Asia, as far as I know. But, like huge numbers of people in the U.S., they say something like 15% of Americans, which is, we're talking 45 million people listen to at least one podcast a day. So that's a lot of people listening. And it seems, I haven't seen any evidence of this, but it seems that probably more people are able to interact with complicated ideas by listening than they are by reading. And so, it's interesting. Yesterday we were talking about getting kids to read because we wanted them to develop the skill of reading. Right? But the other thing we made reference to was this idea that when you are reading, it's almost like you're having a conversation with the author. So, in our world of social media and things like that, we often end up hearing the same point of view that we have over and over again because we're in a group of friends that have the same way of thinking about things and looking at things. But when you read a book, you can be you can have a chance to learn about or be exposed to totally different ways of thinking about things. And so there's a real benefit of that, I think, for your thinking.
And even more so through a podcast, if it's then being articulated through a host, right, you'll get like their point of view as well.
So, well, yeah, and what I was going to say was, you know, the benefit at this point as you get older isn't so much exercising the skill of reading, it's what you're reading. So the focus kind of shifts from developing the skill into getting content that is interesting to interact with. And so our article here has made this progression from sort of a skills focus where you want to get kids reading so they can have good reading skills to now this idea that you're not just trying to have a good skill, you're trying to actually boost your brain power. And so I think that's something maybe worth thinking about for some of our listeners, particularly people who maybe have learning difficulties or, you know, if you struggle reading in your native language and you're a second language English speaker, reading in English will be particularly difficult for you. But that doesn't mean you can't interact with English and interact with different ideas, right? Technology is giving us all of these other things. And I think those things are just as useful for doing this kind of thing. Again, I don't have research to back that up, but I would guess that if you are trying to improve your brain power, interacting with the ideas, whether you're being read to through an audiobook or you're reading it yourself, I would think those are both useful ideas. What do you think?
Well, I think later in today, our article will go on to kind of make a similar point about a specific media in particular.
Okay. Well, we do talk about different mediums, right, here in the article. They're going to get into in a second this idea of screen time. But when they're talking about screen time, they're really talking about like watching videos, right? Playing video games, things like that.
Not necessarily reading ebooks or...
They do make an argument here, though, in this article, and we'll get to this in just a second, listeners, but they do make the argument that there is value in actually having an interaction with a paper-printed book.
Right.
So why don't we get into that now and have a look at what they're saying about how reading will help boost your brain power. Listeners, you can join us on page 39 of your April Advanced magazine. We're going to read through the left-hand column now.
Daily dose of reading helps boost brain power. If, like many people, you are concerned about how much screen time you or your kids are getting, there's an easy remedy which can also help boost your brain power: reading a book in print. According to the American Library Association, students who are independent readers score higher on achievement tests in all subject areas and have a greater knowledge of content than those who rarely read. By reading books and other print materials each day, children and adults could improve their brain power in 2 ways. Improved memory and information recall. Research suggests that the physical sensation of holding a book helps readers retain more information and absorb more details than when they read ebooks or material online. Reading on paper promotes concentration on what you read, so you are better able to remember it. Other studies suggest that taking notes on paper in classes or meetings and rereading them improve recall and retention of information.
Okay, so our reading just started with this phrase, this idea that if you were worried about how much screen time you or your kids are getting, meaning how much time you're spending using your phone or watching TV or playing with your iPad or surfing online, there's an easy remedy. Zach, what is a remedy?
A way to fix something.
Okay, and Andrea, what is that easy fix?
The easy fix is reading a book in print.
Okay, I'll be honest. When I read this, the first thing I thought about was yesterday's discussion, because we were talking about how hard it is to get some kids to read books. So if you're a person who has a child who is, I don't want to use the word addicted, but a very heavy user of screens and devices, how do you get your kid to read a book?
Well, you need to have books, first of all.
You got to get some books.
You need to create the environment.
You got to take their phone away from them.
Exactly.
Force them to read. That's kind of what we talked about yesterday, ways to encourage children, right? And why would you want to replace screen time with the book? Well, according to the American Library Association, there are some real benefits, particularly for students. What are those benefits, Zach?
Well, the first one says that students who are independent readers score higher on achievement tests in all subject areas and have a greater knowledge of content than those who rarely read.
Now, Andrea, we were talking about reading with your children yesterday. Mm-hmm. Are independent readers people who just read alone, or do you think that would include reading with your children?
Well, I think independent readers are ones who read alone.
Yeah.
Primarily. But if you are actually sharing the reading with your child, then they are reading too. So,
see, the reason I asked this is because to me, independent readers could mean different things here. Like for one thing, it could mean you read by yourself.
Yes.
But I suppose it could also mean like you're reading not in school.
Right.
Like not assigned.
Yes.
You
reading.
choose to read for yourself.
Right.
Yeah. So I wasn't really sure what they meant by independent readers here. Let's assume it means you are reading like for your own interest, but maybe we can also assume that it's okay if your parents are reading with you. Mm-hmm. That might count.
Sounds good.
If you're sharing the reading, things like that. Okay, nonetheless, people who are reading, apart from required school readings, are scoring higher on achievement tests in all subject areas. They also have greater knowledge of content than those who rarely read, right? Are you surprised by this, Zach?
I'm not.
Neither am I.
No,
there you
absolutely
go.
not.
Makes sense, right? You learn things when you read. And
Absolutely. I just have to share a story because last night my son, my oldest son, was reading Studio Classroom magazine.
Ooh.
Okay, he does love reading Let's Talk in English or Studio Classroom. And he said to me, Mama, I learned so much from this magazine because there's such a variety of things. I learned about cars. I learned about travel. I learned about people. And I just thought, that's great.
Wow.
It's true. I mean, reading has truly boosted his brain power.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what it says here. But it's not just a matter of like, I guess, binge reading. Binge, of course, meaning you read a lot in a short period of time. It's really more a matter of habit because they go on to say by reading books and other print material each day, children and adults could improve their brain power in 2 ways. And so our reading continued on to tell us what the first way was. Now, Zach, you want to tell us very quickly what was the first way your brain improved by reading every day?
Well, the first one is an improved memory. So
Okay.
your ability to remember.
Okay, so you can remember things, and then that continued on with this phrase information recall. Andrea, what do you think information recall is?
Well, to actually remember what you read. When you recall something, you remember it, and you're also able to produce it again, like share with someone what you've learned.
Okay, maybe sort of remember it when you need to use it, I suppose, is what they're trying to say here, right?
We use the word retention. The article uses the word too, retain or, retention.
Yeah, it's tricky because remembering things and recalling things, often those two words are used to mean the same thing, right? Like, do you recall when we went
Right.
to the amusement park? Really means, do you remember when we went to the amusement park? Do you have a memory of our time at the amusement park, right? So one is a verb, one is a noun, but they really kind of mean the same thing. Okay, so it tells us here that there's a physical sensation involved, and this is kind of that research. Andrea, what is a physical sensation?
Well, that's actually having the ability to feel something. So when you are holding a book, you have that physical sensation. You can feel the book in your hands. You can touch the pages. Sometimes you can even smell a book.
Okay.
And that can add to the whole experience of reading.
So there are, I imagine, a number of different physical sensations associated with books. And there are different ways you can describe them in English. So, for example, one thing people talk about is they'll use a phrase like crack the spine or break the spine. You know what that means with a book, with a new book?
Yes.
Tell us, what is
Well, that means you've opened the book wide
Yeah.
and the spine has cracked where you can almost see a crack going down the back.
it? Yeah, for the first time, right? When you open it, sometimes
Yes.
it even makes a little sound as
Yeah.
the glue cracks, right?
Yep. There is something to it, right? You get your new book from the bookstore. Or I remember I've ordered several from Amazon, and it comes, and you're that first one to kind of crack the spine, open it up.
Do you strongly associate smells with books?
I do,
You do?
actually.
Which smells do you associate?
Well, I like the new book smell,
Okay.
like where you can almost smell the print
Yeah.
on the book. Sometimes if you get a book from a library, it doesn't have quite the smell that you want.
One of the problems I've had in Taipei with print books is avoiding what in English we'd call mildew, which is basically what happens when things get a little bit damp. You know, it's hard to control the humidity. And so they'll get like little brown dots on the outside of
Yes.
the book, things like that. Not the best sensation, I suppose. The other thing people often talk about is the feel of the paper, the feel of pages. And in particular, one sensation that stands out to me, one I don't like, is when the pages are not evenly cut. Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Oh, yeah.
So listeners, here we're just
Come on,
using,
publishers.
we're just using like language that native speakers use when describing the book experience, just so you can sort of get some insight into the way we describe these shared experiences in English. Can you tell me, what do I mean by evenly cut, Zach?
Well, if you were to run your finger around the edges of the book.
So the book is closed,
Yes.
and you're running your finger along the paper part,
And
not
you would
the outside
almost,
part.
Exactly. And if they're evenly cut, you might not even know that it's a book that you're touching, that they're so
It's smooth.
It's so smooth, whereas the other ones can be kind of like jagged or rough.
It's like they're different sizes. The
Right.
pieces of paper are slightly different sizes. That makes me crazy because it's hard to flip through a book. But some people like it because you can. It's sort of a more like a stronger feeling of paper pages, I suppose.
That's interesting. I've never even thought. I know the differences, but I don't
I've
mind
spent
it.
a lot of time with books. There's a lot of things that really aggravate me. Yeah, yeah. Poor book bindings, especially with children's books, are a thing that
Yes.
drive me crazy. Binding, of course, is the back part of the book that holds the papers together, right? So, nonetheless, there are lots of physical sensations that come along with holding a book. Interestingly enough, listeners, English speakers also talk a lot about physical sensation when they're talking about using newspapers, but not so much with magazines. So we have a lot of language associated with books. We have a lot of language associated with newspapers, in particular things like the way the ink from the newspaper can kind of come off on your hands, or the feeling of it, or the sound of opening a newspaper because they're very wide. They have a distinct sound.
The refold,
Yeah.
right?
So
and
there's lots of
there's
language.
definitely a smell to newspaper.
Yeah, that's right. So lots of language associated with sensation with reading. Nonetheless, probably we have all of this language because it's important to us. It's something that registers sort of on a biological level. And so there seems to be an effect here. It says when you're holding the physical book, it helps you retain or remember more information and absorb or take in more detail than when you're using an ebook or material online. What do you think? Do you believe this, or
Well,
are you skeptical?
I was having a discussion once with some of our members at church, and I was talking about when having to write a paper and you're trying to go back to your resources and all of your books, that I really appreciate being able to highlight inside of a paper book and then be able to recall where I read that and just organize all of my information when doing a paper on books that I've read.
See, I hate people who highlight in their book. One of
that's
the
part
things
of it.
that makes me crazy about sort of school culture in Taipei is that students write in their books all the time. You know, because in school in Canada, you don't own your books.
Right.
The school lends it to you. So you're not allowed to write in it.
Well, part of that you could do photocopy,
Yeah.
highlight on the photocopy.
Think about how much work is involved there. What we're encouraged to do as Canadian students is to make notes in a separate notebook.
Okay.
And so they actually get on to saying that there are other studies that focus on this here, just towards the end of the reading. They say other studies suggest that taking notes on paper in classes or meetings and rereading them improve recall and retention of information. So there seems to be evidence that Canadian school has got this right. Take your notes.
Well, and
Don't just highlight. Take your notes.
fair enough. No, fair enough. I would echo that because I do recall I was doing a fairly intense course when I first came out to Taiwan, and we needed to take notes. And I remember thinking, I'm a really bad note taker. It was not working for me. And I pulled aside the leader of our school and asked him, do you have any tips? And then he let me see his old notebook. And ever since then, I have found my reading to really, really improve as I've been able to take better notes.
Okay. So there you go. They actually do say that taking notes in a notebook is more effective than highlighting. But that is not my big complaint. My big complaint is that when you get a used book,
Secondhand.
if it's got highlighting in it, it's basically not the same thing as getting a new good book.
It's true.
So that breaks my heart. Nonetheless, all these sensations, and there seems to be a connection between actually using a book and remembering what's in it. But that's only the first of the ways that reading books improves brain power. Let's look at the second way in our next reading.
Improved language and mental development. The 15 Pages a Day program encourages parents to read just 15 pages with their children each day. Regular reading of print books can help improve children's language development and inspire them to become independent readers, a gift that will last a lifetime. Even when children can read their own 15 pages of a print book, reading aloud will increase their understanding of how knowledge is acquired and shared and encourages active listening. In addition, studies of older adults show that those who read and write regularly experience significantly slower declines in memory compared with those who are not regular readers. Another benefit? A print book needs no charger, and you can read in a cabin in the woods, on a plane without Wi-Fi, on a sailboat, on a bus, or on a beach, so the 15 pages can fit in anywhere, anytime.
Well, looking at the title here, it says that reading books improves language and mental development, and I am completely on board with that, meaning I agree that I think reading really does benefit you in that way. So again, the first benefit was improved memory. I agree. The second benefit is improved language skills and mental development. I think that's probably also true. But listeners, if you have been with us for the entire 2 days of our discussion about this article, you'll know that Andrea doesn't have time to read, and I try to read, but I only read like a paragraph some days because I also don't have time. So in this section, they've got this thing, 15 pages a day. That seems like a lot to me. What exactly is this 15-page-a-day program, Zach?
Well, it's just a program that encourages parents to kind of sit down with their kids and help improve their children's language development, inspiring them to become independent readers just through reading these 15 pages of a print book aloud. Yeah.
Now, so they're saying basically you should read 15 pages a day, right? Andrea, you mentioned one problem that you would have with some of your kids with 15 pages a day, just the idea that children's books aren't that long.
No, that's true. Sometimes they are just 10 pages and that's enough. But just the idea of taking the time to read. Again, we don't mean you have to count every page. I know that in the U.S. they encourage parents to read 20 minutes a day with their parents, which would probably be about 15 pages, especially if you're reading it out loud. So I think for our listeners, yes, this is a good idea, but
don't get hung up on the number of pages.
No.
Don't stay up an extra 20 minutes later when you're tired just because you haven't got to your 15 pages yet. The idea here really is just to sort of put reading into your regular daily routine and schedule, I would imagine, so that it becomes kind of a part of your regular life. Actually, in the next sentence, the second sentence, they sort of change it from talking about 15 pages to saying regular reading of print books can help improve children's language development and inspire them to become independent readers. So they're saying you just have to do it regularly. Maybe it doesn't matter if it's 15 pages or not. And the benefit, of course, is language development, and they become independent readers. And we learned before that becoming an independent reader has a variety of benefits, like it boosts your brain power, right? And so this is kind of a gift, they say, that will last a lifetime. What exactly is the gift, though, Andrea?
I would say it's the desire to read. You're giving kids the benefits of reading, a love for reading by doing it with them. And it's true. It is a gift that will last a lifetime. It's something that will be part of their lives.
Okay. They go on to say that even when children can read their own 15 pages of print book, reading aloud will increase their understanding. Now, that reminds me of something that's actually in our magazines, in the Let's Talk and Studio Classroom magazines. If you look at page 3, which is the instructions on how to use the magazine, they say very clearly you should read it aloud. And that is not just an accident. It's because there is a bunch of research that suggests that reading aloud has a bunch of benefits. And they're getting into that here. They're saying reading aloud will increase understanding of how knowledge is acquired and shared, and it also encourages active listening. Okay, there is more of a benefit here, and it's a benefit to older adults. What is the benefit, Zach?
Well, it says here that through reading aloud, it will significantly slower declines in memory compared to those who aren't doing that.
Yeah, and then they wrap up this article with one more benefit that is, not so much connected to making you smarter, but it maybe is a good thing for the earth. What's that last benefit, Andrea?
Well, that a print book is something that you can read anytime, right? You don't have to rely on other things like having your charger or having Wi-Fi, and it gives some examples in there. So actually, a book that you hold in your hands, a print book, is something that you can read anytime.
Yeah, they actually finish up with that phrase. You can read it anywhere, anytime. That's a fairly common English phrase, just meaning it's always accessible. You can always use it. Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of our April education article. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us in the studio as we've looked at the benefits of reading, and we hope very much you'll join us again for another Advanced Studio Classroom. Until then, I'm Simon.
Andrea.
And Zach.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.